Today, we have Kyle Thacker, our Director of Government Procurement, with us. Just as a little bit of background on Kyle, he's a graduate of Eastern Kentucky University with a degree in construction management. He's worked at ACE for far too long, 6 years, I believe, Kyle, is it not? Going on 7.
It sounds about right.
And the interesting thing about Kyle is that he has worked in every sector of our business. That's interesting considering most people that come into our business, may jump from one to another, but never somebody that's gone through all of them. So Kyle's worked in field operations. That's where he started. And then he jumped over to project controls, worked there for a period of time, and then took over our GSA schedule and all of our direct-to-government services, which is business development, which is where he is at right now. So the topic he's going to be talking about today is an exciting one. I'm excited about this. It's NTP to mobilization. So this is something that our project controls team does a lot of work with our clients on. What happens in between the notice to proceed and mobilization? So what we would hope that you would get out of this is what happens during that time frame, top reasons why projects falter within the first 30 days, how to create a winning 30-day action plan, anything pre-construction, logistics related, resource planning, documents needed. Kyle's going to go through all of that. And then key tools and communication strategies for the early stages of construction. So Kyle's going to go through all that. Also, as a reminder, if you have any questions on anything, we're going to do this a little differently than we normally do. Kyle's not going to go for a full hour. He's going to go for between 30 to 40 minutes, and then we're going to leave some extended time for questions on this topic specifically. I've got a couple questions to kick things off. So if you have any questions during or after Kyle is done, just throw those in the chat, and we're going to get to as many of those as possible. And then if after you're watching the recording of it on YouTube or the link that gets sent out after this, and you end up having more questions, you can go over to our website, ace-consulting.net, and you can shoot us a message on there. You can shoot us an email, and we'll get back to you. We'd love the opportunity to help answer any other questions. So with that, Kyle, you ready to go?
Yes, sir.
All right, man. Take it away.
All righty. I appreciate it. So just wanted to, again, appreciate everybody's time today. Hopefully there will be some little nuggets of information that you guys could take from this. I know this is one of the things that we help our clients with extensively is, for the pre-construction side, how do you make the most of this period of time? There's so many things that happen, and each project is its own animal. You know what I mean? Each project is going to have its own complexity, its own owner or government rep or what have you. And then, a lot of times it comes down to something which we're going to talk about here, but a lot of times it comes down to your preparation as the contractor. What's the old adage? Failure to plan on your part doesn't constitute an emergency on mine, right? And that's really important whenever you start to think about that. You as the GC, us in terms of helping our clients and things like that, we have to put that legwork in as early as possible in order to be able to make it a successful project. We can't necessarily rely on outside factors. We have to take this with both hands and really make it our own. So just wanted to kind of get into this and get things started off for everybody. Again, what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about what happens between our notice to proceed and our mobilization, our on-site construction mobilization timeline. We're going to talk about creating that winning 30-day action plan. We're going to talk about our key tools, strategies for success, talking with our contractors, talking with our COs, talking with our owners, things like that. In the midst of this, I'm sure we're going to uncover, and you all as industry professionals have probably also uncovered several reasons why some of this stuff might fail within the first 30 days. So we'll talk about that. And then, just again, some of the logistics, planning resources, documentation, things like that we can go through and kind of help you get things set up. So very first thing here, just drop this in the chat for us. We're kind of interested to see just kind of gauge the room, I guess, a little bit. Where are you at in your current project? Are you pre-notice to proceed? Or you kind of, you have bids hanging out there? We don't really know what's going to happen. Or do we know that we're going to be mobilizing soon? Or are you already 2 months, 3 months into full mobilization? So just drop that in the chat. We'd be interested to know. So first things first, what happens? What happens, what doesn't happen? As we're talking about this, we need to really be thinking about this as our preseason. NFL just kicked off. I'm sure there's probably some football fans or some sports fans listening to this. This is really our preseason. This is the chance for you to really make a mark and really set yourself apart from other contractors. One of the things we see all the time working with contractors is, well, hey, how's this going to impact my CPARs or my overall scoring system for us as a contractor, our performance or track record. The decisions that we make here are going to really shape the outcomes as it relates to our relationship with our subs and our overall quality. If we have a misstep at this stage, you all probably seen it all the time, but it's going to relate to, you're going to have delayed approvals on submittals. You're going to have delayed approvals on key personnel appointments. You might potentially have rework or penalties in terms of liquidated damages, things like that. And again, ACE works primarily in the federal market. We have some commercial clients as well, but federal projects, anytime you're working with Corps of Engineers, you're working with the VA, anything like that, the administrative burden and the documentation that's required by you, the contractor, it's going to be a lot higher. There's a lot more that goes into it, and that's especially important for new people who are getting into the space. We talk about stakeholder alignment. Again, it's always important to note that when you have a project, this is your first chance as a company, as an organization, to showcase who you are to the end user. If it's the Corps of Engineers, VA, or say it's a local government agency, maybe a school, something like that. You need to be thinking about this in terms of, hey, how do I get alignment between all of us, right? Everybody's here working towards a common goal. How do we get alignment in sort of what those expectations are and things like that? And then lastly here, I've got procurement and staffing preparation. Again, thinking about preseason, you want to be getting those reps in early. You want to be getting if you have key personnel such as quality control managers, site safety and health officers, and or even just your assistant project managers or submittal clerks, whoever it is, whoever that you're preparing as your project team to try and get them ready and get them up to speed on what they're doing. This is the time when to do this. From in this window, our soft start, we get to have everybody's attention front and center and really be preparing as best we can. So, what happens, what doesn't happen? Oftentimes, there's always going to be a kickoff meeting, preliminary schedule, initial submittals, things like that. And everybody says, yeah, of course we do that, right? We do this stuff all the time. Well, yes and no. We might have kickoff meetings, but we don't actually see our clients too often putting in the full framework for their plans, accident prevention, quality control, environmental protection. On a federal project, you might be working with your contract officer or specific window. They might give you, partial approval or a quality control plan for the first 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, whatever it is to kind of get things going. But, we don't see contractors taking a lot of effort to put that full framework together as early on. We also don't see them tying their procurement line items into their schedule. A lot of times contractors are going to be required to submit your billings, your progress billings. How are you going to actually bill against maybe pre-purchased material, stored material? Are you going to tie some of these like long lead items into your schedule in a way that communicates it to the government and that they can plan for it? One of the things that we do also is we look at contractors' S-curve, basically their payment curve within their P6 schedule, just to see, are they front-end loading or are they not? That's something that the government looks at. And if all you do as the contractor is, go in there and put something in, kind of haphazardly, then what are you going to do? You're going to set yourself up for maybe a rejected invoice 2 to 3 times before you get it right. And then again, what doesn't happen, we just don't see a lot of times where you put together some, in this case, I'm saying a matrix, but you don't put out some formal expectations for the stakeholders. A lot of times the government contract officer will typically provide you with something like that, and we see most contractors they'll take it and they'll say, okay, yeah, great, we'll pass this along, right? But what they don't do is they don't necessarily pass that along to their subs. They don't take that one step further. So again, what happens, what doesn't happen? This is not an exhaustive list. We could probably talk longer about some of these things, but just kind of giving you just a little bit of context, basically. And again, what happens if you don't do these? If you don't do this, there's going to be a lot of subcontractor confusion. There's going to be downtime, delays, and risk of liquidated damages, risks to your own credibility as a contractor. If you establish a poor reputation early on as somebody who's not prepared, not ready to go, that's on nobody but you. I'm saying that's really, and it could be difficult sometimes. I'm not saying that's an easy thing to overcome, but you have to be putting in the legwork as early as possible in order to really streamline your operation. So, I got a question posed for us here, and this is another one just kind of for the chat, because I'm, again, genuinely curious. How many days do you all typically get from notice to proceed to mobilization on your contracts? We work with the federal government for, contracts that are typically 30 days. You could see 10 to 30. I'll say that range. But who knows? You might be watching this and be part of a massive government contract or just a massive private contract. You might have 180 days. It varies. So be interested to see. Next thing, whenever we're talking about why some of these things happen, typically what we don't put a lot of effort into is understanding the different phases. So what happens? Well, in order for you to be eligible to receive a notice to proceed, the very first thing that has to happen is you got to win a job. Well, how do you win a job, right? Well, you're estimators. You might have an estimating department. You might have a single estimator. You might be the project manager, and you're wearing multiple hats at one time. You submit the bid, and there's this down period. Basically, all the information that you compiled as the estimator between any kind of subcontractor deliberations, any kind of, if there were any RFIs, any addendums, anything like that, there's information there that often doesn't get captured. It doesn't get handed off to the operations side from the estimating side. That can happen from a variety of ways. Oftentimes it's people get busy, and that's maybe you don't have a dedicated estimating department with 15, 20, 100 estimators. Maybe it's just you and 2 other people that are in charge of doing that. So, start thinking through sort of your process and say, hey, how much incomplete information am I handing over to operations? Second thing, late procurement and vendor confusion. Projects are going to falter because of this, although a lot of contractors saw it during COVID. Late procurement and delays where potentially material wasn't available, material wasn't necessarily ordered on time, it wasn't approved on time. A lot of times you see it with the vendors themselves, a roofing contractor. Well, did the roofing contractor, was he going to pick up the trusses, or was that going to come from another person? I'm making this up, but you understand that if you're not diligent in documenting those sorts of conversations early enough, then you get that late procurement and that confusion where people are standing around saying, "Hey, I thought you picked this up, right? I told you I didn't have it." That's a big risk. Next one here, any kind of permitting surprises. So we see it all the time working with contractors who are on sites, sensitive environmental issues. You might have sensitive, just overall, what am I trying to say? The endangered species, the ecological environments, things like that. Sometimes a contract might say that the government's going to pick that up. It might not, So being upfront and diligent and, again, addressing those as early as possible is really going to be important. Misaligned stakeholder expectations. Again, your CO is someone who prefers to be hands-on. If they really want to be involved in the day-to-day, complete opposite side of that coin, if they just have more projects than they know what to do with. What do I need to communicate up and down the ladder to the folks on the team that is going to get everybody in alignment? And then, the last one here is just insufficient plan development. I've keyed into the, key submittals, basically your critical submittal package, but this could really be anything. If you're not thinking through all of these different plans and things like that, again, it's going to be hard to overcome any kind of delays and mishaps there. So how do you do this? For our purposes and for the purposes of this webinar, I'm going to base this off of a 30-day time period. Now, your contracts might vary. Again, you might have more or less time. There might be different scopes of work. There might be special inspections. There could be a whole host of things there. So what I'm trying to drill in right now to everyone listening is, take your overall window of time, and we're going to break this down into manageable segments. So again, for our example, we're thinking about this week 1. So what happens? So we have kickoff, and we do our preliminary document review, document generation. Most people say, yes, our company does that, or yes, we have the kickoff meeting with the contractors. My follow-up question to that would be, who's initiating this kickoff meeting? Is this a kickoff meeting that you're doing just because the government's telling you to do it? Or is this a kickoff meeting that you're doing because you have, 5 and 6 other subs who they're aware that you won the project, but you're not going to be on their radar for another 3 to 4 months? That you might have a subcontractor for window coverings, let's just say, and you need to break some ground and pour some concrete. So when I say kickoff and preliminary documentation, are you actually making sure that your contractors, the subcontractors underneath you, that they are truly bought in and understand, hey, we're at this level, this is where we're going. Week 2, after we've sort of done the initial kickoff, we've gotten everybody up to speed, we're talking about our draft refinement and our overall submittals. And people say, okay, well, submittals, I'm going to do my critical submittals, maybe my early procurement, so on and so forth. At this week 2 timeline, what we're going to be focusing on is we're taking refinement. Everything that we're doing, we're refining it, working it. We're making it as specific to the project as possible. Week 3, revisions and coordination. By week 3, in this example, we're going to have the vast majority of our items taken care of and at least preliminarily submitted. If you're working with the government, they're probably going to have their own cadence for a program like RMS or something. But if you're dealing with a client or a contract that uses Procore for things like this, think about it. We're going to be standing up the workflows. We're going to be standing up sort of the document formats, the meeting formats, the agenda formats, all these type things. We're just constantly trying to make as many improvements as we can. And in week 4, that's when we're shooting for our final approvals, our quality control, accident prevention, site safety and health plan, accident prevention plan, and then the environmental plan, We're going to be shooting for final approvals for those, and then we're talking about handing this off to the men and women who are going to go and actually build it. Again, what should I take from this? If I'm a GC, I should take away from this however many days I have, break it up into manageable segments for you and your team to be able to put forth an action plan that works for you. Again, this is one example. It might need to be different for a $1 billion company as opposed to a $1 million company. There's a whole lot of stuff that can change there. So now just kind of talking about these different resources and some of these type of things. One of the things we always recommend to contractors for them to generate is their own specific pre-mobilization checklist. And this can be as complicated as your project needs to be, right? It probably scales. If we're being real, listening in on this call, I'm not sure what the makeup is of the audience here. If this is estimators or project managers or maybe owners, I'm not entirely sure. But part of what we're trying to do, especially just in terms of our own leadership on these projects, is we have to make a process that's scalable and repeatable. Put the legwork into creating a checklist that works for you. Your checklists, you might have a concrete, let's just say a checklist to go through, all of the steps to make sure before a concrete pour, right? Do I have my rebar? Do I have my vapor barrier? Has it all been checked and inspected and all this stuff? You might take that and use that as your basis for pre-mobilization. Just add in those extra line items. What necessarily do I need to communicate to my subcontractors? I might not be on their radar again for another 6 to 8 months, maybe a year, maybe more than 1 year. I don't know. But create something for you and your organization that you can use as a pre-mobilization checklist. And, typically contractors say, well, one contract might be, 10 days from notice to proceed to mobilization. The other one might be 30. And it's like, my response is always, you want to have that boilerplate information, right? But you want to be able to make edits to it and make it usable and make it personal to each project and to how you operate. How do you do it? The next thing to use is just part of your overall resource planning is your submittal register. Cannot tell you how many contractors we work with who they say they put emphasis on their submittal register, and the reality is they don't. Something comes up, they focus too much on concrete, metals, masonry. They focus a lot on those early submittals, but they don't put the same level of detail into the remainder of those items, right? They don't actually spell out every single little thing because, to them, time is money. And you think about it and you're like, okay, I get it. However, if you don't, again, we're talking about potential delays. We're talking about potential miscommunications, things like that. Use your submittal register to your advantage. We're talking a lot about this in terms of what the government would provide you. Corps of Engineers, they're going to provide you this type of information. But figure out a system that works for you to leverage that submittal register as much as you possibly can. The next thing is certainly your activity hazard analysis or your JHAs, your job hazard analysis forms. In working with your safety team, your OSHA compliance personnel, your EM 385 handbook, whatever it is that you're using on your project, you want to be, again, forward thinking in our preseason. You want to be thinking through, okay, well, this is a historic site. We're going to have to be working in confined space. So what's my confined space plan? Do I have a confined space plan? Is that something that I'm going to need to generate? Is that something that has already kind of been outlined? I don't know. That's a discussion for you to have with your team. A lot of times as you're going through and filling out the steps in the activity and the protection measures that are going to be put in place, that's going to start to jog your memory. That's going to start to generate a list of questions, action items. Hey, I need to have my scaffold figured out, right? I need to know when they're actually going to come do that. Who's taking care of the inspections? How are we getting the scaffold on site? How long is it going to sit there? Again, those questions might have already been answered. It might have been listed out in your estimator's notes from the project. But I'll just tell you this, if you're asking the question, I guarantee you somebody else on your team is also asking that question. And then lastly, weekly coordination meetings and kickoff agendas. This is again your chance to set up your team for success. So put your hat on and think about things in terms of, well, I'm a month into my construction project. I'm 3 months into my construction project. What are some things that could potentially be there? What are some things that maybe I need to have constant reminders of? Something that's maybe a very specific scheduling requirement or a very specific sequence of construction operations that I know isn't pertinent now, but maybe it's pertinent in 6 weeks or 6 months. Put those notes on that agenda and list them as reminders. Set yourself up there to, again, make the most of this preseason as best you can. Next, we want to be talking about some key tools here. And these are ones that we've helped a lot of contractors with, even though it wasn't specifically required. So key tools like a site logistics and a laydown plan. Temporary utilities plan, an access road plan, a haul route. How are we going to move material on and off site? What about just an overall subcontractor orientation plan? Has there been any thought given to how we're going to onboard new subcontractors, people who we've never worked with before? Maybe you're in a new market. You're used to doing work in New York State and this project is in Kansas. I don't know what it might be, but how are we actually going to onboard these subcontractors in a way that we establish our payment terms, our meeting cadence, all those things? What's it look like to them? And then lastly, our procurement schedules and our baseline updates. This is going to go hand in hand with the rest of your project management items. Really utilize and put thought into your schedules. Built that extra block of time in your schedule so that hey, I'm doing all of these steps week by week by week. The rule of thumb is basically if it's between 2 days and 12 days. If it's shorter than 2 days in duration, you probably are not going to include it on the schedule. If it goes longer than 12 days, you're typically going to break it out into multiple action items or multiple activities on schedule. So, again, use that schedule to your advantage, that baseline. It's a tool, so we got to use it. We talked about our stakeholder expectation matrix, but utilize some form of expressing to the team, here's how we're going to communicate. Here's our regular cadence. Here's what I'm going to be expecting from you. Here's what you can expect from me. We've got regular check-ins between the general contractor and the subs. Most people on this call are probably going to say, yep, we meet in the job trailer once a week, or we meet on the 5th floor. I'm making this up. Here's what we do, right? But again, us as leaders, we have to go above and beyond what is the status quo. We have to go above and beyond that. And so establishing those check-ins and making that cadence second nature for the people that we work with is really important. And then finally, anytime anything is approved, if it's partially approved, if it's completely approved or rejected, pretty much in anything that you do in construction, and I'm sure other industries as well, documentation is critical. Right. I can't say that enough. Document it, send out emails, record information, record phone calls in your emails, do things like that really will help prevent disputes later. Because I've seen examples of in this pre-mobilization timeline in the first 30 days, a contractor going back and forth with a concrete sub. And they would say, well, my quote didn't include rock excavation or something, whatever the thing might be. There would be deliberations. You would meet about it. You would talk about it 2 or 3 times, still in that kind of gray amorphous area. Didn't really get the clarity that we needed. Hey, what can we do? It's just kind of left outstanding because, again, things come up. It wasn't documented. And then what happens? We've got a dispute a month down the road. Who's charging for this rock excavation? Who's actually paying for it? Is it in your scope? Is it in mine? All of this stuff, if you're taking the time to set this stuff up in this pre-mobilization window, it's really going to pay dividends later in the project. And then, lastly here, and I'm kind of jumping through some of these. Just wanted to do is that right? Yeah. Okay. Just making sure. Just lastly, your first 30 days on this project, or your first 15 days, or your first 180 days, they matter. They really matter. And I'm sure you all have seen or heard horror stories of not making the most of their time, but it's really up to you to take control of your job site and make it successful. Define what your project success looks like. Don't just treat this as a copy and paste plan and spec project. This is your company. This is your livelihood and the livelihood of the teams that are working with you on this project. So define what success looks like. We want to put our best foot forward. We want to really shine and answer our owners' questions and give them the best end user experience that we can. Let's define what that looks like. And we want to avoid these pitfalls that would typically come up with just general planning and communication. A lot of times it just comes down to the expectations were not established early on. It was too ambiguous, it was too rushed, or it just wasn't well thought out. Again, showcasing what you can do as a contractor means avoiding those things, putting the extra legwork in there. And, I've got here, use a 30-day action plan to accelerate compliance and reduce risk. Just in general, if you showcase to your contract officer, to your owner, if you showcase this level of detail early on, it's going to do dividends. It's going to put their mind at ease, knowing that, hey, if they're really thinking through things at this level, I know I'm not going to have anything to worry about in 6 months, 8 months, a year, whatever it is. It accelerates compliance. It makes your submittal approvals go a lot smoother. It reduces your financial risk at the end of the job, and it reduces your liabilities and your subcontractor disagreements, things like that. It really is key to having just an overall good experience as opposed to just the next, nightmare job, which nobody wants. And then this is just my kind of takeaway question for all the people on this call and everybody listening is, if you could fix just one part of your mobilization process today, what would it be? And I hope that there are some things that we've talked about here that maybe spark discussion amongst you and your team. Maybe just something that you bring up to your subcontractors, or maybe to your owners. Maybe you've got a project that's getting ready to kick off here in the next little bit. What could you do? What one little change could you make that would just pay dividends, that would really take you from where you're at now to maybe where you want to be later? So yeah, that's pretty much my approach here. And again, I understand that there's some limitations as to each project is going to be different, but hopefully just thinking about it in terms of that 30-day period, week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, what can I be doing? How can I lead my team in a way that really shines and puts a spotlight, a positive spin on what it is that we're doing? Hopefully that gives you the framework to kind of go there.
Thank you, Kyle. That was great. And just as a reminder, if you have any questions right now, we're about to move into the Q&A portion. Throw them in the chat and we will get to as many of them as possible until there isn't any more. And then we can wrap this thing up. We've got 4 right now. Kyle, I'm going to hit you with one from Matt first, and then another one just came from Matt, and then I've got a couple myself. So the first one is, oftentimes on projects, I see an additional window of contract award to notice to proceed. Can these administrative planning steps fall within that contract award to notice to proceed window? And is there any liability in getting those items started before the notice to proceed?
I would say they certainly can fall within that time frame, not having actually looked at the drawing. They certainly can. As far as liability goes, and maybe this is a follow-up question, do you mean specific to maybe your subcontractor agreements, like a buyout process, or are you talking about specific material orders? That might be some.
I mean, the only liability that I would think in regards to that is just because you got a project award, there's things that could happen between project award and a notice to proceed time frame, whether that be funding issues or something like that. So, I mean, from that standpoint, I think there is a little bit, in my opinion, but I think it's always better to get started sooner rather than later on that. Because if you got a contract award, and a lot of it also depends on, do you know the owner? Do you know if it's the government? Do you know the contracting officer?
Yep.
Is it a live bid opening? Is it something where you can go immediately to them and you feel a certain type of way, to feel good about it? He says more so making any commitments to the project before you've been instructed with the go ahead.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And that's you said it right there, Josh. I'm sure there's some level, but really, if it's something that you can just go ahead and get an early start on that, I certainly would.
Yeah. Okay. Next one. Are there any nuances with design build that changes these steps? Design build often off-puts the urgency of these items you talked about, so it's often a struggle to squeeze them in. Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah. So within the frameworks of what we've talked about here, that's a great point. This is more so plan and spec oriented, right? If you have a design build project, you're going to be faced with the different design phases, 30%, whatever percent. Each one of those is going to become their own sort of challenge, and there's going to be different steps that get involved with that. But again, if you take this model, like kind of what we've talked about here, of the different design stages, incorporate those into your checklist. If you're a contractor that primarily works on design builds, then absolutely this might be more complicated, but that can also be something that you use as part of your selling strategy whenever you're talking with owners. If you know them well, or if it's something that you're bidding on, hey, we do step for each phase of the design, and then your mobilization plan will start to incorporate those extra items for the design, as well as it starts to transition into real construction. That my guess is you would probably start to have, at a minimum, your extra site lay down plans, your extra haul routes, your extra things like that. You're stepping into that extra level of care, that extra level of detail for a design build, and it's just going to make your checklist that much larger. But that's you investing into that future success.
Yeah, we even see, and Kyle, I know you know this, a lot of our clients that we do pre-mob services for, or any of our other services for that matter, or a lot of them are design build projects, and they may be at 60% design, but we're already in the process of rolling through key personnel and getting all the plans that we can. Obviously, there's certain plans that you're just not going to be able to do until the design's complete. But there is a lot of stuff that you can have already stocked in the can while that stuff's going on. So from the action plan standpoint, it's more of an added on. The design build process is getting put into the action plan, not the action plan put into the design build process. That makes sense.
That's exactly right.
Okay. Here we go. We got another one. Do you have any strategies you can recommend to ensure that the subcontractor and our project manager are on the same page about what is required of the job? A few times we've run into issues where project managers may not have caught a technical portion of the job that the subcontractor should have, and it was missed. Ultimately, it should be our responsibility as the prime contractor, but it is challenging when the direct manager does not have the same technical knowledge as the subcontractor, and that came from Danielle. So thank you for that question, Danielle.
Yeah, so that's a great one. That's a great one. I was a former estimator before I started to work here. The first place that, and my strategy to kind of counteract that would be, again, in the estimating to operations transition, right? So you're not knowing much about how many estimators you have or sort of what your overall process is there. If there's that discrepancy between maybe somebody doesn't have the same technical acumen as you do or something, what does our bid process look like? Do we have a bid leveling sheet or something that simply itemizes line by line, this is in their scope, that's in their scope? Making it as simple as possible so that even someone who's maybe not be familiar with the construction process at all, we see this a lot all the time, say like a restaurant owner, what do? They like to cook food. They don't know anything about a fume hood or a fire damper or anything like that. So maybe your meeting minutes start to incorporate those. Hey, this contractor is responsible for this. They have that, or they don't have this. I would often take the approach of just doing whatever I could to lead them along, right? Basically arrive at the conclusion that we need them to. But to your point, it does make it difficult whenever you're dealing with somebody who doesn't have that same level of technical expertise. It's just as quick as you can and as respectfully and as clearly as you can put it out there, go ahead and establish that cadence. And that just comes down to, maybe that's something that's picked up in your meeting minutes, or maybe it's something that's picked up in that estimating to operations transition. There's a lot of places. That's where I would say I would start, is that when we pass the torch.
Yeah, and I think too that just having multiple different fail safes is also never a bad thing. We act a lot of times as a consultant, we act a lot of times as a project executive of sorts with project managers on projects. And a lot of it has to do with that specific question right there, just simply because the project manager's got 150 different things that they've got going on. I mean, they're trying to do buyout. They're trying to meet with the owner, make sure they're happy. They got progress meetings. They got schedules they're working on. Sometimes things miss to the point of the question. Sometimes things get missed. And a lot of times the subcontractor is not going to catch that either. And so sometimes a project executive of sorts type person that is within that process, not like intricately involved in it, but they have a overview and they check something like that before it actually moves forward, just to ensure that, because it, to your point, that's a very bad feeling when you find out that something was missed and nobody caught.
Yep. I was burned really bad one time on a pre-pour checklist for concrete, and it was that same thing. It's like it was a large pour. There were some of those things that got caught, and some of them didn't. So you kill them with the facts, or as to Josh's point, just be as redundant as you possibly can.
And sometimes you think that it's a waste of time, and so hopefully it is a waste of time. Because if it is a waste of time, then that means that everything got caught the first time and there was no issues there. But the one time that it isn't a waste of time, a lot of times can be the difference between a project falling significantly behind and you maybe start looking at LDs, or your profit margin was at 5%. Now it's shrunk to 2% because of something that was missed there. Okay, we've got another one from Taylor. Estimating transition to operations has been our biggest hurdle. Any suggestions on how to overcome this? That's close to your heart, Kyle.
Yes, it is. Not knowing how large your company is or whatever, I'll just give you a little quick backstory. I came from it was a smaller general contractor. We did primarily commercial construction. There were about, at any given time, 3 to 4 estimators that were working on projects and doing what they needed to do. For the longest time, all we did was we just bid the work. And anytime we would win a job or finish up a job, we had again, this is small business, but a simple folder system, binder system, all those scope sheets, bid leveling sheets, all those things got put into one document. And then say we got the green light on the award, we would sit down with the project manager and superintendent. We would go through things like that. What we started to realize was, again, with the best will in the world, things are going to get missed. And so what we transitioned to doing after that, we started noticing our projects just were not getting kicked off fast, whatever. What we started to do was we actually adjusted our bid cadence slightly. We reduced the number of bids that we were putting out. And I know that sounds kind of crazy a little bit. We reduced the number of bids that were going out, but the time in between bids, right, that period of time when you don't have anything going on, the estimators took on the role of putting together subcontract templates for contractor buyout, right? Going ahead and getting the sub agreements just drafted. You might not have them finished, but you have them drafted. You could put in their inclusions, exclusions, because you, the estimator, were already, you had that information in front of mind, and you could spell that out more easily, and ask questions more easily than the project managers could. So, I guess what I would say is, and again, I understand an estimator's time is just as crazy and as valuable as anyone else's, but there are those downtimes in between bids when you need to be going that extra step for your project managers. And likewise, if a project manager is the one that maybe they were the lead to actually get you in the negotiating table or at the negotiating table for a new project, what steps can your project managers be doing to set your estimators up for success? What documents are we using? How consistent are we saving all this place in the same shared folder, or are you using a binder? Again, that might sound kind of surface level, but it's how you implement that within your organization. How do you actually guarantee those sort of checks and double checks and triple checks into the cadence of your estimators, your project managers, superintendents, foremen, whatever? But that was how we did it. We just started to take on that extra role as an estimator to where we would do another, just that one little bit more. So hopefully that helps you.
And Kyle, I think too, just along the lines of our own process specifically, yeah, we're a consulting company, but we do work directly for the government that we have to estimate and then perform. And with our pink team reviews and our different processes in regards to those review periods and the pricing reviews, we bring operations in to those meetings. You don't want it to be where it becomes a burden for operations, because obviously they have to be the ones performing the work, but they're very appreciative of being brought in, so they at least know what's coming and they know exactly how it's structured. With us specifically, a lot of it on our end it revolves around the price and what's included or excluded from other direct costs and things of that nature. Because if they don't know that ahead of time, and maybe they know something we don't in regards to a person or a location, they could get something and be like, what the heck, man, like this, this is impossible for us to get this done for this amount of money or something like that. Whereas now they have a direct line to what we're doing. Sometimes, most of the time, they don't have very much to say because we've kind of got it all covered. But the 1, 2, 3 times that they do have something to say is the difference between a good bid and a bad bid a lot of times in regards to things like that.
Yeah, just extra. To kind of build on what Josh is talking about there, when he was talking about our color team meetings, this is something that is more involved with projects that require a technical proposal as opposed to a simple, plan and spec, low price bid. But for a technical proposal, you would have something where what we utilize is our color teams, and it goes pink is the first one. You've got red, green, gold. It progresses through the entire bid cycle from the time that you identify the lead to the time that you complete and finish up what it is that you're doing. And what Josh is saying there, that's a system that worked for us internally. Is, again, we get our people involved early on. And I'm sure you've probably experienced it where you might start to bid a project and, something changes and you have to end up backing out. Well, having those milestones, or in our case, those color team meetings, that gives you that off ramp or that on ramp to bring those people in with you, and they understand exactly why you either followed the bid to the end or you decided not to turn in a number 2 weeks out. So just a quick clarification. I appreciate you talking about that.
Yeah, and just also for everybody that's on. That sounds like a lot in regards to what we do with the color team meetings with, having 5 of those. It sounds like a lot, but it's really not. Some like for instance, the pink team meeting, that's a 10-minute meeting, right? You can pull somebody from operations into a meeting for 10 minutes. And so some of them are longer, especially when you start getting into the gold and things like that. That's the point of submission, really. So at that point, they may be a little bit longer, but what we try to do is not pull operations into a meeting that's any longer than 15 to 20 minutes tops, because we know they have other things going on. They're out there making money. So we don't want to have them tied up for a whole day in regards to something that we may or may not win. But overall, it's been very, very productive. So if anybody wants more information on that, you definitely reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to talk to you about that and even send you something on what our process is there. We've got a couple of more minutes. I'm going to go through these last couple of questions that I had prepared earlier for you, and we can kind of wrap that up from there unless anybody has anything else. First one, I'm going to go backwards because I really like this last one. Where would you put subcontractor buyout on the importance scale in regards to pre-mob timeline? So subcontractor buyout, what level of importance are you giving that in the NTP to mob process?
Pretty high importance. We talk about the work that we do for our clients in regards to their key or their critical submittals for quality control plan, accident prevention plan, things like that. Those are paramount. I'm talking 1A, 1B, just because, again, when you go to you've crossed into that area of, you've got the green light, we're going to start mobilizing, we're going to start working. That's when everybody just seems to magically forget what they included. Hey, I asked a question about, this column or this specific scope of work, and it never gets put in there. So again, that goes back to that point about getting those contracts finalized, getting that buyout identified. What subcontracts are we actually talking about? I can't say enough about that. That's probably its own presentation of just sort of how to manage the buyout process. But yeah, I would say, again, 1A, 1B, those are super, super important.
Well, and two, I think a lot of it depends on what your company does as to where that falls within that process. Because if you're self-performing a lot of it, and for the first 6 months of a 2-year job, your crew's the one that's going to be out there, then it's probably not super high on the priority list in regards to your notice to proceed to mobilization timeline, right? You're working on everything else there. But let's say that you're not. Let's say you're just a straight up GC and you are subbing out mostly everything, or you are subbing out everything. Well, as soon as you get to the site, you're going to have a subcontractor there.
Gotta have
starting on something. So if you don't have that buyout done prior to that, you're going to be sitting there with a drop site trailer with electric and water and all these haul routes and lay down plans and everything, and you're not going to have anybody on site doing nothing because the buyout process was not institutionalized in your action plan.
Exactly right.
I asked a question. It's a tricky question, but I thought it was warranted considering that subcontractor buyout tends to be a huge issue for people. Let's see. I think we can fit this. We can do one more. What do you see as the biggest mistake that contractors make between the NTP and mobilization? Biggest mistake.
Biggest mistake, I think, is that people assume too much. They assume that their subs understand them. They assume that the government understands them. There's just too many assumptions. They leave too much stuff to a phone call or a simple text. I know that's a simplified example, but it's like I really just think people make too many assumptions. It's not spelled out. It's not clear. I think it's where people go wrong.
Gotcha. Understood. And as a reminder, just overall, unless anybody has any other questions, we'll go ahead and wrap this up. It's almost an hour here. We do pre-mobilization setup. That's something that we started doing about 2 years ago. It kind of fell into our lap just in the nature of what we do with federal construction. We had never really thought about it as a service until we had a client come and ask us, hey, we're really having trouble here. Could you guys help us with this? And so that started out as just like a consulting hourly rate type of a situation. But then after that, we put it into a package where we help clients. And most of the time, about 80% of the time, any project that we have a field staff member or any kind of management staff going out to, we end up being the ones to help do the pre-mob setup as well, because they know what they're walking into when they get there, and it's been very successful. So if anybody needs help with that, or they maybe think they've got it, but they've got some questions about something, we'd be more than happy to jump on a call, jump on a Teams meeting to help out with that. or just answer any questions. It doesn't have to be a service that, ultimately we're in the relationship business now. So we want to help people. It's not necessarily about us selling something to anybody. So if we could just help in one way or the other, we'd be more than happy to do that. So thank you everybody for jumping on and registering. We really appreciate it. We'll have another one here in a couple of months. We'll send out some reminders and some stuff on social media about that. But once again, thank you guys so much.